be a very difficult day. And we're sensitive to that. And the fact that maybe you lost a mom, or maybe you've been longing to be a mom, or maybe you had a miscarriage this year, or maybe you have a rough history with your own mom, whatever it is. We also understand it's a very difficult day. And so just know that we've been praying for you, that this would just be a day where you feel loved and encouraged. And we aren't doing like some special Mother's Day message or anything like that. We're just going to continue on our series called Stronger, which is all about relationships. And we want to have healthy relationships. The line that you'll hear or have heard throughout the first few weeks of this, and we'll continue to hear next week when Lacey's actually going to be preaching, it's this: our satisfaction level in life will rise or fall based on the health of our relationships. And because what's at stake in our relationships is our joy. Again, you all know this. Like when you have healthy relationships, it's joyful. When it's unhealthy, your joy is stripped away. And so what we've been wanting to do is to invest in, what does it look like to invest in healthy relationships? And this is across the board. It doesn't matter if you're single, if you're divorced, if you're married, whatever it is. We want to think about every relationship that we have, and that's what we've been doing the first couple of weeks. We have looked a lot into the first 2 weeks of our childhood wounds. We aren't going to do that today. I didn't want to do that to you again, but we are going to talk a little bit about circumcision, so there's that. But we're not going to go deep into our childhood wounds. But we are going to talk about something that I think is so important, yet we do a terrible job at this kind of as a whole, culturally. And I just was thinking about this line, that dialogue works and monologues hurt. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today, that dialogues work and that monologues hurt. And, we're not very good at this culturally. We're not very good at this when we talk about politics or religion or sports or anything, right? We like to choose a side, stay on a side, and we don't want to listen to anybody else. Relationally, we do the same thing. We feel like we're right, and we're going to stay on that side, and we don't care what the other person says. And we don't take in a lot of other perspective. How many of you guys have ever kind of popped off or got opinionated about something that, if you're really honest with yourself, you don't know a whole heck of a lot about it? Yeah, right? It happens all the time. We get man, can you believe this? And you kind of get all set in your ways about something, and then someone asks you another layer of question. You're like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I've never actually researched that before. And so that's just what happens. And what's interesting is we all do a lot of that. We all kind of play a role in that. And unfortunately, that's just part of the deal. Even if you think about this, what are the two things that you're not supposed to talk about in conversations? Yeah, politics and religion, right? The two things that shape our whole entire culture. People are like, you know what, don't talk about them. Don't talk about them. That in and of itself should tell us that we've got problems in how we exchange information back and forth. The fact that we can't dialogue with each other about politics and religion, the two things that shape our culture, is sad. And it shows us that we can't really engage like we should. And it impacts our relationships. It impacts our ability to change. It impacts our ability to learn. It impacts our ability to take in other people's perspectives and everything. And so it's important for us to learn how to have dialogue. Did you know that even your social media presence, you have a personal profile on the internet? You are an algorithm. All right, that's what you are. So the second you start researching something, it goes into this profile that they have on you on the internet. And then what the internet then does is it just spits out articles and spits out information back to you on your social media feed that actually just enhances what you already believe. All right, so that's why you don't see other perspectives. That's why you don't engage it. That's why they even take a look at your friends list and they see, do your friends lean more conservative or liberal on things, and then they feed you articles that way. All right, so that's how even social media stuff works, and that's why it's easy to tamper with elections and all that other stuff too. So that's why we become more and more divisive. So it's imperative that we learn how to dialogue. Now listen, if you are a Christian, you should be really great at dialogue. You should, there's no excuse as a Christian to be someone who's not good at dialogue. Here's why. So if you're not a Christian, you can just breathe easy and be like, yeah, I can do whatever I want, right? So if you're a Christian, here's why. Because our posture as a Christian should be one of humility. Should be one of a realization that we don't know everything. Should be one that we're looking to serve and honor people around us and to truly love people around us. And then when we actually do that, then that's when we're able to dialogue, to end up listening and be great listeners and learn from each other. The problem is we don't do that well. We don't. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're a non-Christian that you don't know how to have dialogue or anything like that. That stuff matters too. But as a Christian, there's even more put on you because of what you say you believe. And so I want to dig into that a little bit this morning. And we're going to take a look at, because this isn't a new thing. When you look at the problems with dialogue, this has just been the history of humanity. And so I want to take a look at this passage in Acts 15. Now, the book of Acts, if you're not familiar with the Bible, the book of Acts lists out kind of what happened in the early church. Okay, so when Christianity started, this guy named Luke wrote the book of Acts, and he started detailing out, hey, here's what we're going through, here's what happened, here's some of the key things that were kind of pivot points in the history of the church. And so that's what the whole entire book is really about. And so what we start seeing here is there was this cultural clash where they were lacking in the ability to have dialogue. All of the new followers of Jesus were all Jewish. All right, so the first several thousand followers of Jesus were Jewish. And so they had their traditions, they had their things that they did that were kind of set in stone, the rules, everything. And one of the biggest ones was actually being circumcised. And then you had these Gentiles that were coming in to the fold that didn't hold to the same traditions, that didn't hold the same views on food or sexuality or anything. And so they're coming into the fold and they want to believe in Jesus. And then this clash was happening. And it was really a big deal. Like, there was a lot of things going on. There were racial things going on. There were kind of classism things going on. There were sexism things going on. It was like kind of similar to what we have going on right now in our culture. And so these things were happening. And they had to figure out, what do we do here? How do we bring people together? And so they had this moment where they had to intervene. The leaders of the church had to intervene and figure out how to actually have dialogue and learn how to grow, because they were steeped in such traditions that they were hurting people. And so I actually believe that the greatest way to honor tradition is to change it. And here's what I mean by that. Every tradition that we follow at some point was an innovative idea. And so when we look at traditions and we learn to, hey, how do we tweak it? How do we make it better? How do we change it? Like, you're honoring what that tradition once started as. And so even as we kind of think about, like, this is what happens within they had this Jewish tradition, they start thinking, all right, how do we need to change this? And one of the biggest things was this idea of circumcision. This is what revealed or showed was tangible evidence that you were part of God's people in the Israel, chosen people of Israel. And so what happens is these Gentiles are coming into the fold, and they might be like in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and they're coming in, and the Jewish leader at the door is like, here's the deal, dude. This is going to sting a little bit. But like, in order to follow Jesus, this is what has to happen. And so like there was this big moment where like, well, do we really have to do this? And so these guys get together. We're going to see this guy named Peter, who was one of the pillars in the early church fathers. We'll hear about him. Paul and Barnabas were two people that were also kind of very active as the early Christian leaders. And this guy James, who was the brother of Jesus. So we'll see him in this too. So Acts chapter 15 says this, starting in verse 6. The apostles and elders met together to resolve this issue. They're talking about circumcision there. It says, and at the meeting, after a long discussion, Peter stood and addressed them as follows. Brothers, you all know that God chose me from among you some time ago to preach to the Gentiles so that they could hear the good news and believe. God knows people's hearts, and he confirmed that he accepts Gentiles by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. He made no distinction between us and them, for he cleansed their hearts through faith. So why are you now challenging God by burdening the Gentile believers with a yoke that neither we nor our ancestors were able to bear? We believe that we are all saved by the same way, by the undeserved grace of the Lord Jesus. Everyone listened quietly as Barnabas told about the miraculous signs and wonders God had done through them among the Gentiles. When they had finished, James stood and said, "Brothers, listen to me. Peter has told you about the time God first visited the Gentiles to take from them a people for himself. And this conversation of Gentiles conversion of Gentiles is exactly what the prophets predicted. As it is written," and here's what Luke is about to say. He's referencing this prophecy by this guy named Amos, like several hundred years before. He said this, "Afterward, I will return and restore the fallen house of David. I will rebuild its ruins and restore it, so that the rest of humanity might seek the Lord, including the Gentiles. All those I have called to be mine, the Lord has spoken. He who made these things known so long ago." Let me pause there for a second, because I want you to see something. See what they're doing right here, what James is doing right here. He's like saying, hey, do you remember what we've believed for literally hundreds and hundreds of years? Like generations, this has been passed down to us. This is happening right now. And so what he's doing, he's establishing some common ground, the ability to then bring people in together by saying, hey, we're all human here. It's been talked about before. Like we got to bring this in together. And so then James ends by saying this. And so my judgment is that we should not make it difficult for Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write and tell them to abstain from eating food offered to idols, because what they would do in pagan temples is they would offer idols up to other gods. And so James is like, that's not cool. Let's not do that. And he says from sexual immorality, and he's probably talking about, there's some debate here what he's talking about, but it's probably people visiting temples that were designed for prostitutes. And he says, and from eating meat of strangled animals, and from consuming blood, which they were elements of pagan feasts. And for the laws of Moses have been preached in Jewish synagogues in every city on every Sabbath for many generations. And so what James is doing here is like, how do we bring people in together? How do we take a look at maybe what are some things that might be stopping this relational divide? What can we do to actually bring people relationally together? And I think there's some key things for us to look at here this morning, because I think there's some things that stop us from having dialogue that we actually see in this passage. You see, what these guys were, they were authoritative. They had leadership. They were all in relationship together, and they had certain power because of that. But there were other things that they did that allowed them to bring people together into relationship. And so I want to take a look at 4 things that actually stop us from having dialogue. And again, this is in every relationship that we have, and so you got to contextualize it. If you're single, married, dating, or you're going to think about this at work, whatever it is. But there are 4 things I think that stop us from having dialogue. The first thing is our ego. Our ego is a problem, and our ego plays such a pivotal role when we discuss things, because what happens is at any moment when we're faced with maybe being wrong or being held accountable or being responsible for something, our ego kicks in, and we don't want our ego to be bruised. We don't want to have to say we were wrong. Here's what happens when we are prideful. And we allow to just think through all right, my ego's at play here. I'm getting defensive. I'm getting negative. But when we operate out of pride to protect our ego, we become fearful. We fear being wrong. We fear that we might have to change. We fear that we have to take responsibility for something that we've said or something that we've done. I don't know a lot of people. Actually, I don't know anyone who's you know what? It's super fun to be wrong. I don't know anyone that's relationally being oh, yes, you got me. I was wrong again. Right? No one says that. And so why is that? It's because of our egos. Our egos. And so we get defensive, we get negative, we get prideful, and we want to protect that. See, the guys in this passage, all those guys, the leaders of the early church, they didn't have egos. They were looking at all right, how do we have dialogue here? How can we make this happen? And they had to say, all right, we need to hear everyone's perspective here. We need to take all this in together. And they were willing to take a step back and be objective and do that. If we don't do that relationally, then we're fighting for all the wrong things. And that's why we get mad. That's why we miss each other. That's why we get suspicious of each other. That's why we can't trust each other. All those things happen. Why? Because we're constantly trying to protect our ego, and so we get defensive and we get negative. Even the way that our brains actually work is called effective priming. And so here's what this means. If I were in an argument with somebody, or if I were in a discussion or a dialogue with someone, and I start off negative or something that's hurtful, immediately not only my brain, but their brain only takes in hurtful and harmful and negative things. And even if I come back around and say something really loving and caring at the end, your brain can't take it in like it should, because your brain's already focused in on what was negative and defensive. So even when we operate, how many of you guys have worked for somebody who was just negative and only monologues and just was kind of condemning all the time? Yeah, you didn't sit there you didn't love going to work. You didn't couldn't wait till they talked to you. And even if they complimented you or encouraged you, what was your thought? Oh, they're just saying that to get me to do something else. So think about it. So we do that with our friends. We do that when we're dating. We do that as parents. We do that as teachers. We do that as doctors. We do that as husbands. We do that as wives. We go that route sometimes, and we might go negative first, and then we immediately then to whoever we're around relationally, they can't take in the positive that we want to give. Well, the opposite is also true. When you go loving and positive first, then our brains have a really hard time taking in the negativity. That's why it's important to be so grateful and understand what it means to be thankful and write it down and talk about it all the time and to be loving first. in our words. Like it deeply matters. The words that come out of our mouth, like deeply, deeply matter and are shaping things. And so we can't do that, though, when we're trying to protect our ego. We can't do that when we're getting defensive all the time. We can't do that where we're just getting negative. We're only and criticizing people around us. And so it's important for us to take that in. All right, is my ego impacting this? The second thing that I think happens is that we don't know how to do it. Very few of us were raised in homes where we talk about how to handle conflict the right way, where we talk about how to dialogue the right way. Maybe for a lot of us in here, we didn't even have parents or primary caregivers that dialogued in such a way that as we were raised with it, we saw that. We're like, okay, that's how people might disagree in a loving, kind way. And so we miss out on that part. We don't know how to do it. Well, what's required of us? Well, we got to be humble. We got to be willing to learn and grow in that way. We got to take a step back and be like, okay, how do I actually do this? How do I actually do this? We've got to learn and invest in, how do I communicate? How does someone think about me when they're communicating with me? All those things that matter so much. We got to learn how to do it. If we're in this constant state of fighting and arguing and being defensive and we look relationally, we feel like, oh, no one's ever paying attention to me. No one's ever taking my side. No one's ever doing this. And the reality is because we probably don't know how to actually dialogue with folks. We don't have taken their perspective. Do you know one of the greatest ways that you can dialogue with people and show them that you know how to do it is to share their perspective. As you talk about them, you are sharing their perspective, sharing their life, their experiences from their perspective. That you can actually say it. Can you imagine if every relationship you had, from your friends to your whatever, any relationship that you have, can you imagine if you were in this constant state of them sharing your experiences through your perspective? Do you think that you would think to yourself, gosh, it's so great. Man, when my friends talk about me, it's so cool. They'll say things like, man, do you know when he did this? This is from his perspective, how he told it. What does that show? You were actually listening. I was at a networking event for a bunch of pastors down in Alabama a few weeks ago, and there's a guy he's a pastor here in Richmond, and he knows me pretty well. But it was fascinating. We're going around to all these guys, we're meeting new people, and he kept doing this, and this was just making me laugh, because we would introduce ourselves, and then he would then start sharing things about me from my perspective, and I wouldn't say anything. He would go on for 5-6 minutes, and he just kept saying, but how did that make me feel? It really made me feel like we were super connected, because he's sitting there telling stories that I've told him, but he's sharing these stories, whether about me as a pastor or about our church, and just really encouraging. Right? It got to the point at one point where I was like, man, he's maybe even embellishing a little bit, but it kind of sounds good. And so but he was just so encouraging, and for so long, it was 45 minutes long. It kind of got that feeling of oh, stop. But I was kind of doing this too. It was yeah, stop. And so, but what did it show in that moment? Man, he's really listened. He really cares. He's really invested in what our conversations are, because he's sharing my experiences from my perspective, but he's the one actually saying it. And so can you imagine if relationally that's how we operated with the people around us, that they felt heard that much? Can you imagine that? I started thinking about this, what's a great way for us to start this process about engaging and learning how to do this? This guy named Jeff Henderson, who's a pastor down in Atlanta, I heard him say this question at an event I was at, I don't know, probably a year and a half ago now, and it has just stuck with me. He said it this way. He said, we need to find people where we can ask this question. What's it like to be on the other side of me? You want to start real dialogue? Start asking people around you that question. Now, I know right now you're thinking who do I want to ask that question to? Who is a safe person I can ask that question? Who will lie to me, right? Think about that. What's it like to be on the other side of me? If we could do that, this is actually, so I instituted this when we have our year-end meetings on a staff, I ask questions that are kind of centered around that. So I can learn just more as a leader and help people out. Lacey and I have conversations like that, and have put that working into our communication. But can you imagine if you're married in this room and you sat down with your spouse and you went home today and you just sat down over lunch and you said, hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And you just listened. Let me ask you something. If your spouse can't be honest about what they want to say to you, what does that say about how you've treated them? If you get into your friend groupings and you sat down and your group of friends together and you're like, hey guys, you guys are super close. Like, what's it like to be a friend with me? What's it like to be on the other side of me as a friend? And if they don't feel comfortable actually sharing what it's like, how healthy is your relationship? Can you imagine if you went to wherever you work and you asked your coworkers, or if you manage people or whatever it is, and you sat some people down and you said, hey, what's it like to be on the other side of me? How about this? Can you imagine sitting down if you've got kids and you're like, hey, come here, bud. What's it like to be my son? What's it like to be my daughter? What's it like to be on the other side of me? Like, what do you experience with me? Some of you guys are like, nope, I'd rather the authoritative role. Like, that's better. But can you imagine doing that? Would you take on that challenge of the people you're around right now to go ahead and do that? And then what do? You take it all in and you start dialogue. I think the third thing that stops us is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. So we've got ego, we don't know how to do it, we've got confirmation bias, and every person in this room has confirmation bias. Don't kid yourself. Like, the most objective person in this room has confirmation bias. All right? And right now what people do is whenever you talk about confirmation bias, they're like, well, it's because I'm right. That's why I'm just confirming that I'm right. Right? Like, that's what we do. But confirmation bias is simply this, that you look through the lens of your own beliefs and your own interpretations of things. And then what you do is then you take something to just confirm what you're already biased towards, right? That's what I was talking about, the social media stuff and everything. We do this, right? We have an opinion on a topic that we really don't know a lot more, that we say we know more about than we actually do. And then we find an article that just goes along with that, and we'll be like, see? Even though that article was done by like some robot somewhere, right? And so we do that stuff all the time. And we just kind of confirm like what we've already said, that we already believe in how we view life, and we don't learn, we don't grow, we don't take in other perspectives, and so we don't ever do those things. And you know how, like, if you are someone who actually actively engages your bias, then you will be able to articulate how you do it. You will say things like this. Like, just say you're passionate about politics. You will say this. I love politics, and here's where I come from. But here's what I do actually on a regular basis to engage the other side. These are the books I read. These are the things I listen to. These are the things I watch. These are people I've actually engaged with that are actually from different perspectives than I am. And we've taken in this great dialogue. I'm still on this side, but you know what's interesting? They've got some stuff here that I think is super positive, and there's a lot that goes on there that I think they're actually right, but I just come from a different perspective on that. If we don't do that, then we actually aren't looking for other people's perspectives. If we can't articulate those things on whatever it is, whatever topic it is, then we really aren't looking to grow, to learn, to actually engage people in dialogue. We're just looking to confirm what we already believe. And then the end result is carnage of relationships around us, and we only gravitate and only talk to and only care about and only love people that agree with us. And so that's why relationships break up. That's why relationships get unhealthy. That's why we have what we have in our political world today. That's why, this is what happens. And so we just pick things and then confirm what we already actually believe. We also, along with confirmation bias, we have belief perseverance, which is you have this belief that you hold on to, and no matter what anyone else says, you're just going to believe what you believe. And in some ways, that's good, right? Like with my kids, I love my kids. No matter what they do, no matter what you tell me that they've done, whatever, I'm going to always love my kids. I have belief perseverance with my kids. But then there's the bad side, like for example, you may have gotten in 2 accidents in the last 2 months and you've got 4 tickets to go alongside of that, and people are like, you're not a good driver. And you're like, I am a good driver. Like, you're not. And you've gotten 2 accidents, you've gotten all these tickets, and your response is, I got here, didn't I? Right? Like that's the way you think about things. It says perseverance, but it becomes hurtful in our conversations. It's hurtful in all of our relationships. And so this bias and this belief perseverance it's ruining everything. And again, like our language, our words, it creates culture. And so we've got to think about, hey, how am I talking about this stuff? And how am I actually interacting? And how am I dialoguing about all these different things? Whatever the topic is, whatever it is relationally, whether it's on a big scale or small scale, whatever. That's why it's so critical for us. I mean, even think about it this way. When people talk about decisions, like say, centered around morality, morality is like an interesting thing because most people are trying like have their own set of morals and everything else. But even when you look at morality, there's a lot of layers to the topic of morality. When you look at kind of what research does, they have like 5 or 6 kind of deeper meanings to morality. There's care, there's liberation and proportionality. Liberation and oppression. There's proportionality. There's sanctity. There's loyalty. And there's authority. Those are all kind of things that kind of feed into how we view morality in our culture. And what's interesting, even when you start talking about whatever topic it is, we can be coming from different perspectives, even in how we view morality. And so you can see, like just through dialogue, how this actually will work and why it's so important for us to challenge each other on like, hey, why do you think that way? Why do you reason that way? Where are you coming from there? But when we don't do those things, all we're doing is hurting the people around us. This is why when you kind of look at our culture as a whole right now, it's just like we're in this mess because we don't really know how to dialogue. The 4th thing is this, and this is the last one. We think it's weak. We think it's weak to actually dialogue. We think it's weak to just talk about things. We think it's weak to just sit there and be like, oh, let's sit down and talk about this again. Well, here's the thing. In order for us to ever change anything, we've got to talk about it. See, here's what dialogue creates. Dialogue creates the opportunity for us to engage what actually needs to change. So that when you figure out what needs to change, you then have an action to take, so it's the right thing to take. The problem is when we don't dialogue about it, we don't know what to do to actually change something. And so when you just kind of go at each other and it's a monologue on either side of the thing, and we don't actually interact like we should, then nothing ever changes. If you've ever been in an argument with someone and you just feel like you're just going like this the whole way, you're just both talking at each other. We're not actually dialoguing with each other. Otherwise, we'd know what would need to change. And so then we build that out on a larger perspective within our culture, and we have what we have. See, dialogue isn't weak. It's actually the best thing you can do because it reveals what we should do as a couple, as a friend, as a manager, as a boss, as a politician, whatever it is. Like, it reveals it. But when we monologue, it just hurts people. And so we want to keep up dialogue. Here's a major key for in dialogue. We need to seek wisdom together because wisdom's a sacred thing. So we need to seek wisdom together by not making the other person a villain. That's what these guys did. That's what Peter and James and Paul and Barnabas and all the leaders of the early church, and that's part of what they're seeing. They put aside their egos. They learned how to talk to each other. They didn't concentrate on just their bias. They didn't think it was too weak to dialogue together to come up with a plan. And then here's what they did. They didn't make the other person a villain. When you're making the other person a villain, all you're doing is you're going to push them away. This is why, when we see things like stuff like on the news and stuff like this, and we elect leaders into the country, and this is what they do. They just make the other side a villain. Both sides do this, right? Just make the other side a villain, and then whatever side you're on, you take that side, and then you make the other side a villain too. And then guess what happens? Nothing. Nothing gets done, nothing changes. I mean, nothing does. Don't we do this in our close relationships? Because we don't know how to dialogue, who do we make the villain? The other person all the time. And when you make the other person a villain, you're immediately cutting off the opportunity to actually have dialogue with anybody. And then who gets hurt? Both you guys. And so we need to invest in it and get the wisdom together and realize that other person's not the villain here. In order for us to come to a solution and come to have healthy relationships, we've got to learn how to dialogue together. Band, you guys can come back up. Now, why does any of this matter? So when we look at the message of Jesus, and when at the core of the gospel, it's this idea of broken relationships that were made whole through who Christ is. It's the idea of a broken relationship made healthy. The restoration of joy, the restoration of hope, the restoration of love. And those things coming into play are a core message of the Christian faith. You know, we're going to sing a song here in a second, and it's called Presence of Heaven. Now, it's about Jesus, okay? And that his presence, it just feels like heaven to me. And it's a beautiful song. But when Darrell texted me that that's what we're going to be singing as a response song today, I started thinking about this. If we follow Jesus, shouldn't what people say about us as Christians, man, when I'm around you, it feels like the presence of heaven? Like, shouldn't that be the case? Shouldn't a husband look at his wife and vice versa and say, man, being married to you feels like, it's like the presence of heaven? Shouldn't friends get together? Shouldn't they get together and being like, man, we're cultivating, like it's just like a little glimpse of heaven here. See, I think some stuff that we need to do, like in terms of self-reflection, but I think we got to start thinking through, like, man, when people are around me, do they experience the presence of heaven? Like, if I disagree with somebody about something, like, do they experience the presence of heaven with me? Like, if I lean more liberal, would a conservative person feel like, man, when I'm around you, it's like the presence of heaven? Would someone who's gay feel like, just when I'm around you, it's the presence of heaven? Someone who's transgender, they feel like, it's like the presence of heaven around you. Someone who's maybe of a different race or different perspective, would they feel like, just man, being around you is like, it's like the presence of heaven? If you were to meet a refugee coming into this country, would they feel like, it's like the presence of heaven? Something is different. And if the answer is no, then we've got some repenting to do. See, here's what I think we all need to do. I think we need to have a time of confession. And what I mean by that is we need to start really thinking through the relationships where we haven't done this right. We haven't done this, like, man, I'll tell you what, people have not experienced heaven with me. They've experienced something differently. See, here's what I believe. I believe if we can't dialogue well, we can't love well. If we can't love well, we can't be the presence of heaven. And if we're not the presence of heaven, then what we're doing is we're actually making people experience the presence of hell. And that's what we see. If you've been in a really crappy relationship, you experienced hell. And so I wonder, and we're going to do 2 minutes to think here in just a second, but we've got to have a time of just like confession and understanding, like, all right, who are the people that I haven't done this well with? And then a time of repentance was like, I'm going to turn around, I'm not doing this anymore. And then be willing to change. And so if you're new here with us, we kind of end all of our services talking about how all of this hinges on like whether or not we want to say yes to Jesus and follow Jesus and what that means to cultivate. And this is what all this stuff is about. And you have a choice to do that today if you want to follow him. But we also are starting something new called 2 minutes to think. We do 2 minutes to talk, which is like split whether or not you like it, honestly. But this 2 minutes to think, it gives us a time to reflect on what God's speaking into your heart right now. And so we've got some questions. Go ahead and throw them up there, and then we'll throw 2 minutes on the clock. And I just want to read them off to you. And here's what we ask everyone to do. Take out your phone, take out a pen and piece of paper, and write an answer down to one or all or whatever of these questions. And then if you got further questions you'd like us to dig in more with, you can email them in, and we'd love to start a dialogue with you about that. But here are the questions. Who is one person that you can ask? What's it like to be on the other side of me? Second one, what is one thing you can do to learn the perspective of someone you disagree with? And the third one is there someone you need to apologize to for lacking the ability to have genuine dialogue with over a certain topic? So we're going to put 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to take some time to think, and then we'll sing a song together, and Lacey will close us out.
Can stand as we get ready to sing this last song. And I think let's keep that in mind, how much we want to, we want our presence to feel like that of Jesus. We want the air that we give off to feel like, man, there's just something different about these people. There's something different about when I'm in a room with these people, when I'm having dialogue with these people. There's something different about it. And if I can be honest, like when John just said about, do people feel the presence of heaven around you? I think there are times where I would say yes to that, and I think there are a lot of times where I would say no to that. And so I think there's areas where we can all work on with that, where we can all work on what does it look like to really be and exude the presence of Jesus with how we interact with others in our lives.
Like you, Lord, in all the earth, matchless love and beauty in this world. There's nothing in this world that satisfies. Jesus, you're the cup that won't run dry, 'cause your presence is heaven to me. Your presence is heaven to me. The treasure of my heart and all my soul. My weakness, you are merciful. Redeemer of my past and present wrong. Holder of my future days to come. 'Cause your presence is heaven to me. To me. earth I will await the moment that I see you face to face. When there's nothing in this world can satisfy. Jesus, you're the cup that won't run dry. And Jesus, you're the cup that won't run dry. Oh, your presence is heaven to me. Oh, your presence is heaven to me. There's nothing like your presence. Well, your presence is heaven to me. Oh, your presence is heaven to me.
So we're going to close today with a prayer for moms, but I also wanted to just encourage you this morning. One of my favorite quotes that as a mom, when I feel like I'm losing focus or just need some encouragement, always kind of brings me back to the right place, is from someone named Andy Stanley. And he said, the most important thing that you do for the kingdom of God might not be something that you do, but someone that you raise. And so just wanted to put that out there with you all, with all of you moms this morning, because it's a hard job, and but it's a really important job. So wanted to say on behalf of all of the kids out there, no matter how old any of us are, thank you. Thank you for the sacrifice that you make. Thank you for all that you pour in to being a mom, no matter what stage of mothering you are in. We're so grateful, and we need you. And we need you to stay focused, whether you are feeling swamped because you've got a baby or you have adult children. We still need you. So I wanted to pray this prayer over you all this morning. There's a scripture that I want to focus on. It says, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." So would you pray with me? Lord, I just pray this scripture over all of the moms here this morning. I pray that you would give us the strength and endurance to stand firm, to be immovable, and to stay focused on this mission that you have given us to love your children well. Lord, whenever we are starting to feel discouraged or to lose focus or to feel overwhelmed, I pray that we would feel your presence so strongly, and that you would bring people into our lives to cheer us on and to encourage us to remain firm in you and this good work that you have given us to do, because it is not in vain. And there is so much joy that will be on the other side of it. Lord, I pray over each mom that is here today, no matter what stage of life that she is in, for the moms that might be feeling overwhelmed or might be feeling like they got it wrong this week. Lord, I pray over the moms that might be hurting because their kids have made some choices that have just brought a lot of pain to their lives. Lord, I pray over the single moms. I pray over the foster moms. Lord, we need you, and we are depending on you. Lord, I lift up those that are here this morning that have broken hearts. Whether that's because they maybe lost a baby or a child this year or in years past, or maybe they lost their mom. Lord, I pray that you would just begin to heal those broken places in our hearts. God, I pray for those that have broken relationships with their moms or have broken relationships with their kids. Lord, you are the God of restoration, and we just ask that you would breathe hope into those relationships and that there would be steps towards restoration there and healing there. God, you see each of us where we're at. And we thank you so much for seeing us and for loving us. And we thank you that we do not have to be perfect. We thank you for your forgiveness. We thank you for the joy. We thank you for entrusting us with this mission. And we just ask that you would help us to love them well and to see them through your eyes, and that you would give us a fresh perspective so that we can be the presence of heaven as moms. And so, Lord Jesus, we ask all of this in your name. Amen. All right, you guys can have a quick seat, and I'm going to give you a few instructions as we wrap up here. If you would like someone to pray for you this morning, maybe there's something going on that you just, it would feel so good to have somebody pray for you. We've got a team of people over here to your left, my right, and they would be really honored to pray with you this morning. If you would like to talk something out with somebody, maybe you want to take a next step in your faith, or maybe you have questions, or maybe you decided you want to follow Jesus and want to know what's next, then stop by the What's Next Lounge and talk to the folks there. They would really, really love the chance to talk with you this morning. And I want to make sure that you moms that are here, that you are celebrated well and that you are made to feel so special. So I don't want you to miss some of the little moments you might have seen as you were coming in that you can kind of partake in as you leave. First of all, we have the mother of all beverage station. So if you didn't get a special drink when you came in, then head over there, right in the breezeway there. Then we also know that being a mom is no cakewalk, right? It's hard. So we wanted you to have a cakewalk so that you can experience that. So what a cakewalk is, if you don't know, it's a game that you play, and there are little numbers in a circle on the floor, and music plays, and you walk around the circle. When the music stops, you're standing on a number, and they call the number, and if they call your number, then you win a cake. And so we've got lots of cakes for you to win, so make your kids hold your stuff while you go and play a game and win a cake, all right? So that is, we moved it inside because of the threat of rain. So as you're leaving the doors, it's on the left before you exit the building, so make sure you stop by there. We've got a great big photo booth so you can fit all your people in it, take a good picture, and then we have a gift for you. So please do not leave without taking a gift. It's a really nice picture frame with some art. The art is two-sided, so you don't even have to decide which one to take. You're welcome. We've taken a decision off of your plate this morning. So make sure you take that. Now, if you are a child in here that did not get your mom a gift or a card, just know this is for the moms. This is not for you to take and pretend you got them something, okay? So go home and make your mom a card. All right. That's all I've got for you. So you guys can stand up and head on out.